Friends, a lot of people have asked why hasn't China intervened in this war between the US and Iran so far? And does China gain or lose from this war? In this video, I'll be answering these questions, but before I do so, please like, comment, and subscribe, and share any long or short video of mine that you like because it helps us in our outreach. YouTube's algorithm pushes us up with each like, with each comment. So, to figure out China's behavior, we have to first see what is at stake for China in this war. That is, what are China's interests with each counterparty? It is true that China gets 13% of its oil imports from Iran, but in total, it gets about 35 to 40% of its oil through the Hormuz. That means between 22 and 27% of its imports are from the other GCC countries. And this I'm just talking about oil imports. In terms of exports, China exports about $9 to $10 billion worth of goods to Iran every year, whereas it exports about $139 billion worth of goods to the other GCC countries, that is to the Gulf Arabs. And these Gulf Arabs, especially the big ones, Saudi, Qatar, UAE, they also invest a lot in China, in FDI, FIIs, in their stock market, and in the venture capital firms. So their economic stakes with the GCC Arab countries is far greater than China's stakes with Iran. This is not all. China's stakes with the principal participant in this war, that is the United States, are far greater than even this. China exports in total over $500 billion worth of goods to the United States every year. 325 billion in direct exports, but China does a lot of third party exports. That is, it exports through Vietnam, through Mexico to the United States. So in total, about $650 billion worth of China's exports are at stake. These are very important for China because as its domestic economy has slowed down, especially domestic consumption, due to various reasons, including an aging population and the real estate bubble bursting, as you have seen over the last couple of years, China has become even more and more dependent on exports. So China will not want to put that at risk. And that explains to a large extent its behavior. It is also afraid that if it supplies too many offensive weapons to Iran, Trump has threatened any supplier of weapons to Iran with sanctions. I mean, Russia doesn't care because Russia is already the most sanctioned country by the US and Europe. And so it will hardly make any difference to it. But Russia is afraid for another reason, that the US could put pressure via Ukraine on the Russia-Ukraine battlefield. China, on the other hand, fears these sanctions and tariffs, as I've just explained. But more importantly, China is not yet powerful enough to take on the US. China is still about a 19-20 trillion dollar economy. The US is at 31, 32 trillion. The US defense expenditure is around 1 trillion and may go up to 1.5 trillion this year. China's defense expenditures officially are around 350 billion, but unofficially they may be as much as 700 billion. And so China is not yet ready to take on the US. In fact, it doesn't have global bases also like the US. US has bases across the world, dozens of bases just in the Middle East. China has only one base outside of China, that is in Djibouti. That was also primarily for anti-piracy operations. China also fears that US can put more pressure via supporting Taiwan and other East Asian rivals of China. But China does benefit in a very important way through Iran. This is by tying down huge amounts of US resources in the Middle East. That is a number of aircraft carrier battle groups, a number of ships and submarines, large number of US troops and aircraft bases. They are there in the Middle East primarily to block Iran. Tomorrow, if Iran were to disappear as a threat, all of these forces would be moved to East Asia to block China, both with respect to Taiwan, which is one issue which it deeply cares for, but also to possibly protect other American allies and keep China blocked in the South China Sea. China overall avoids getting into foreign entanglements because it believes these drain your strength. In fact, it believes that the US, by repeatedly fighting in the Middle East, has only hurt itself. That is, the US has prevented itself from pivoting to East Asia and has affected its economy also with the trillions of dollars lost in Afghanistan, Iraq, etc. And it does not want to repeat those mistakes. But does China gain or lose from this war? I would say overall it's a 50-50. China does lose in a particular way. That is because of this war, energy costs are being pushed up. That is, crude oil costs are being pushed up. This creates inflation within China. Goods become more expensive because inputs become expensive. Similarly, incomes across the world suffer because cost of all goods across the world increase. Therefore, this decreases purchasing power for Chinese goods. As I've just explained to you, China is highly dependent upon exports to prop up its economy. If the cost of Chinese exports and Chinese goods increases and the purchasing power of the global public decreases, this decreases China's exports. Moreover, as I've explained to you, 35 to 40% of China's oil imports come through Hormuz. China does have large reserves. Some people believe about 1.1 billion barrels of oil. But even such large reserves will come down in a few months. This will create huge problems for China because China is not only dependent on oil for energy, but also for fertilizers, also for plastics and petrochemicals. To some extent, China has mitigated this because China has really increased its renewable sources of energy, electricity. You know, China has become the world's largest and cheapest manufacturer of solar panels. China can produce a solar panel for as little as 10 cents US, produces over 80% of the world's solar panels. China produces almost 80% of the world's electric vehicles, and China produces over 90% of the world's batteries or battery inputs. And yet China is not free of oil or the need for petrochemicals. While the war benefits China because it boosts its reputation as a stable country in contrast to America, which seems irresponsible and costing the world a lot of damage through this unprovoked war of choice that it has launched along with Israel. As I've already explained, it also gains because America's forces are tied down in the Middle East. But on the other hand, China loses economically, as I've explained, because of its exports, because of energy costs, because of the uncertainty of its oil, petrochemical, and fertilizer supplies. So China will continue to help Iran in the ways that it has been doing so. That is through satellite intelligence, because that has helped Iran a lot in targeting. Iran has received a lot of satellite information through Russia, through China. It has even reportedly been using China's Baidu system of GPS equivalent. China and Russia will continue to help Iran diplomatically by vetoing American sponsored UN resolutions in the Security Council. China, as in the past, will continue to provide chemical and missile fuel precursors. And there are reports that China has also been providing shoulder fired, heat seeking manpads, that is, surface to air missiles which can be fired off the shoulder. But unfortunately for Iran, these can only hit low flying helicopters and aircraft. So it can't hit most American or Israeli aircraft which fly at high altitude. Of course, Trump has threatened that if anybody supplies weapons, China, they will face US tariffs and US sanctions. Keeping that in mind, China has tried to keep this low profile, and publicly the Chinese foreign ministry or government has not acknowledged these exports. But China's biggest benefits may come if this regime survives and the reconstruction that will be required after the war. That is, there will be tens of billions, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars worth of contracts to rebuild the infrastructure, to rebuild the industrial base, power plants, petrochemical plants, hospitals, schools, various kinds of equipments that Iran will need. And China will, of course, be the main and China will, of course, be the main beneficiary of these contracts, both because it has stood by Iran, also its goods are cheap and can be paid for in terms of oil, that is in terms of a barter trade rather than in dollars. They can be paid for in yuan or in oil itself. So I expect Chinese behavior to continue in the way it has throughout this conflict. So keep watching, keep liking, keep sharing, and until next time, Taswadania.